Okay, so I was talking in the last segment about the probability of getting married, and a lot of people have part of the reason why people have been reducing their likelihood of getting married is because they have other options, cohabitation, other things that they can do. They can have sex outside of marriage that used to be prohibited. I mean, if you wanted to have sex in 1960, you probably needed to get married. Whereas in 2020, it's not necessarily a requirement that a person be married in order to have sex. So there's not as much motivation biologically like that to have to get married. And so what would be the advantage of getting married? Well, one factor that makes marriage attractive is that married people report more satisfying sex lives than single people do. Again, I'm looking at that National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior from 2010, and we see the married couples in the light blue bars, and 81% reported that they had had sex in the past year, which you might be thinking to yourself, well, I would hope so, you're married, but it's not always a guarantee that being married, I think I showed you guys earlier the Japanese data that showed that it's like inverted. 81% had not had sex in the past year. So having sex in the past year seems like a pretty good argument. Looking at single people, it was less than 40% who reported that they'd had sex in the past year. And then if we look over on the right, we see they report the percentage of people reporting that they had had sex 2 to 3 times a week over the past year. And married couples, about a quarter of them reported that rate of sexual activity, as opposed to a single person, it was more like 5% who achieved that rate of sexual activity. Frequency is one measure of satisfying sex life, right? And so married people seem to be winning on frequency. And so Psychology Today did an interesting sort of synopsis of the evidence that might explain why married couples tend to report having more satisfying sex lives. One is the simple convenience, right? You live together, you know that you're committed to each other, and you're right there. That's beautiful. Understandable cues, right? Being with a person over time, you start to pick up on their cues of interest and things like that. And so you're not taking as much of a risk in attempting to initiate sexual contact. Safety from infection is a really important factor. So knowing that this person is monogamous and that you're monogamous makes it, you can be a lot freer in that relationship. A lot less likelihood of rejection, that even if the person says that they don't feel like it tonight, they usually try and make sure that your feelings aren't hurt and that this isn't a permanent, I never want to have sex with you again. It's maybe timing isn't right, or the baby cried or something like that. And so you have a little bit of buffer for your feelings. And then something that a lot of times people forget about with regard to married couples is that because you have a longer period with each other, and then also that commitment, there's a little bit more freedom in a married couple, where it's like, even if you think what I'm suggesting that we do together is too kinky, you're probably not going to leave me over this. So I'm going to suggest it and see if you like it. And then maybe if you don't, I'll just play it off like a joke. Yeah, I didn't like it either. And, but you can try things out. And, a lot of times I think people think of married couples the way that they're depicted in the media as being sort of like, well, now they're just basically roommates or something. And a lot of times people think about married couples as being really stoic and sort of, they got married because of their religious beliefs. And so they're just doing it because it's like the right thing to do. And like, I hear all these different kinds of stereotypes. But the average married couple is married because they want to be married and that they really like their partner and their best friends kind of feelings. And, that they want to grow together and they want to have experiences together that, fulfill both of them. And so as a result, you end up with this sort of safe place to, try out new things, to suggest new things, stuff like that. So these factors were offered by Psychology Today as explanations for why married couples tend to have satisfying sex lives. All right, well, that's really great, except that sometimes couples, it doesn't work out, right? So I thought I would talk a little bit about divorce rates. So the light blue bar is the data on the divorce rate among first marriages. And the dark blue bar is the data on divorce rate for second marriages. Now, I could keep going with, third and fourth marriages because some people get remarried. I just looked up a rock star that I saw on TV the other day, and he's on his 5th marriage right now. So sometimes people go, repeatedly and get married. But I'm just going to talk about the first versus the second. So first off, notice that on the first marriage data, the bar really starts at 5 years. It could go sooner, but it really kind of starts at 5 years because that's when noticeably you have about 20% of couples who divorce within 5 years. So this is cumulative data. So this is within 5 years. By 20 years on the first marriage, just over 30% cumulatively have divorced by 10 years. By 20 years, we're not quite at 50%, according to this data. On second marriages, first off, you'll notice that our data starts on year 1 because 10% of second marriages don't make it a year. And then by 5 years, we're at a little bit more than 30% that have failed. And by 10 years, we're at almost 50%. So second marriages are inherently less stable. Third marriages and fourth marriages. Now, sometimes people say, oh, I married the wrong person and I found my soulmate in the second marriage. And that can happen. I mean, it really can happen. But on average, second marriages are less stable than first marriages. So you have all probably heard the statistic that 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And my chart here sort of looks like it's agreeing with that, where you're seeing the first marriages ending in divorce by 20 years, right? 50% are ending in divorce by 20 years. The problem with this data that I'm showing you on the screen and the data that I cited, 50% of all marriages end in divorce, are that these are not longitudinal studies where they went back and followed the same people. Even though these are lines and it implies that they're following up with the same people each time, what they're looking at is divorce, how many marriages occurred in a year divided by how many divorces occurred in the year. That's not the same people getting married and then getting divorced. It's how many divorces occurred in the year, how many marriages occurred in the year. And so when we do it a little bit differently, so using that computation, we end up with a 50% divorce rate. Because there are roughly twice as many marriages each year as there are divorces each year. And some states have more divorces than that per year. And so they'll say they have like a 65% divorce rate. And what they mean is there are, 2 divorces for every marriage in that state in a given year. So first off, if we were to take the second and subsequent marriages out, that number would be different, right? Because if we were only looking at people whose divorces were from their first spouse, that divorce rate would go down. Because as this graph illustrates, second and subsequent divorces are less stable. The other thing that produces different outcomes is if you look at the Census Bureau data, where they literally, every 10 years ask you if you're married, if you're divorced, this and that. And what they find in the Census Bureau data is that do I have this? Yeah. So I didn't graph out what I was planning to from Census Bureau, so I'll just tell you about it. So in the Census Bureau data, they've found that first marriages have roughly 30% of them will end within 20 years. Roughly 30%. Not this 50% that this graph is showing, which is comparing marriages and divorces in a given year. And, asking about how long you had been married as one of the factors. Instead, they actually followed people across the Census Bureau data and found that within 20 years, only about 30% of first marriages end in divorce. So this graph helps to explain that probability a little bit differently. So among couples who got married without living together first, their probability of divorce within 10 years was about 28%. In the second bar, if the couple cohabited before marriage and then had an official engagement, that's it, everybody let's celebrate, we're getting married, we're making the next step, everybody celebrate our new phase of life, their probability of ending in divorce within 10 years was about 33%. And the couples who cohabited and didn't have any kind of official engagement, but instead said things like, well, it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter. Let's just go ahead and get married. They had almost a 40% chance of divorce within 10 years. Now, you can kind of hear from my characterization what might be the factor that mattered in the cohabitation plus engagement versus the cohabitation with no engagement, right? Like people who view marriage as a distinct change in their status and who invoke the support of their friends and family and the people in their community to really, support them through this part of life. Marriage is not the world's easiest thing. I've been married a really long time, and I can tell you that, having somebody say, you don't have to stay married to this person could make it very easy for you to ultimately say, you know what, this is a bunch of BS. I don't feel like dealing with it anymore. I might as well get divorced. Whereas if the people around you reassure you that this is normal, that, no matter who you were with, this would probably be, if it weren't this, it would probably be something else. And I'm not talking, as I'm saying this, about any kind of abuse or addiction or anything like that. I'm talking about just normal, annoying things to be with another person all the time, right? Just normal, seriously, you didn't do the dishes again kind of things, right? It's a function of being in a house with somebody else that causes these kinds of frictions. And having your community remind you of that makes it a lot more likely that the couple can stick it out and move on. And so having this moment where you're saying, we're going to go from cohabiting to actually this engagement where we're telling everybody we value marriage and we do in fact value marriage, makes it much more likely that marriage is successful than if the couple really doesn't think marriage is a different thing and really hasn't gotten the support of their family and friends and stuff because they really don't look at it like that. Divorce might just be an option on the table for that type of couple than compared to the other two, the couples who didn't cohabit first or the couples who cohabited and had an engagement. And so researchers have been trying to figure out why cohabiting prior to marriage is associated with a higher risk of divorce. They've been looking at a lot of different things. One of the first early explanations was, well, people who don't cohabit are just by nature more conservative, and therefore they probably have more religious beliefs about the sanctity of marriage, and that's probably why they're not getting divorced. Kind of the old, well, it's a big commitment for them, and they're just stuck in it, and they don't like it, but they're stuck kind of interpretation. But more modern research has been looking at the interpretation of how the couple actually views the institution of marriage and what they think it means for them. And couples who think it's a commitment that they really are, involved in, and that, other people are helping to encourage them to be involved in, it makes it more stable. Now, if you guys want some homework, there's a show on, I think it's Lifetime, called Married at First Sight. And some of you may have seen it. And it's based on the old-timey premise of arranged marriages. And in the first season, they arranged 3 marriages, and 2 of them stayed married after the show, and one of them ultimately did end up getting divorced, but they were married for 3 or 4 years. But in that show, they invited friends and family to the wedding, and then that was sort of the last we saw of friends and family in the couple's lives. I think we're on season 12 or something now. I don't remember. And yes, I watch it because I'm a big fat loser who watches shows like this. But it really is a great example of the idea that having the support of your friends and family, having that commitment that you made to each other, really guide. I know that we are placed together because we must have things in common. We are both committed to the institution of marriage. Our friends and family want us to stay together. Those kinds of things can make it more likely that the couple will work through things. Whereas some of the couples, their friends and families are like, I think this is crazy. What the heck are you doing? You don't know this person. I don't know if I can support you in this marriage. This person could be an axe murderer. I don't know. When you have that kind of second guessing in your ear, or the concern that maybe your partner is really in it because they just wanted to be on a reality show or something like that. If you have those concerns, it makes it a lot harder to be truly committed to the institution, right? And so then you're like, I don't know, this might not be a real relationship. In the modern, more recent seasons, they've really been trying to incorporate the friends and family in more. so that they can be a support for the couple and encourage them to stick with what they've said they wanted, which is a married stable relationship and so on. And it has contributed to more of the couples staying together, at least, initially. I can say that. The years will tell, and it's hard to know whether they are happy or not. Like, these things are hard to gauge, but having the support of the people around you to stay in the relationship is a really important factor in staving off divorce. Now, I really want to emphasize what I said before. I'm not talking about like abusive relationships or other things. I mean, it would be horrible for your friends and family to encourage you to stay in an abusive relationship, or a relationship that includes addiction, or something that is, like it would be better for your mental health to be out of. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the standard, annoyances that come along with being in a relationship. I'm just talking about normal things, like things that are not dangerous or harmful. All right. I think that's a good place to stop. We will come back in the next segment and we will wrap up development with sexuality and aging.